Today on the Milk Making Minutes, you hear the story of someone who saw birth and breastfeeding as an ultimately empowering experience, but it was not without struggle. This story highlights both the struggles that exist and how those struggles can be mitigated with fantastic personalized support that begins prenatally. As you listen, think about the support you received prenatally in the first days and weeks after your baby's birth, and through the first few months when you may have encountered postpartum anxiety or depression. Were you as supported as you should have been? What would it take for all birthing people to get that level of support? Let's dive in. When I began breastfeeding, I was blindsided by how difficult it was. I may have thought I was prepared, but having known only a handful of people who had ever breastfed and only seeing it up close from a couple of them, I had a huge learning curve. Since then, I've become a doula, a lactation consultant, and a childbirth educator. I'm your host, Lo Nigrosh, and I welcome you to the Milk Making Minutes, where we explore breastfeeding experiences through the lens of systemic barriers, so that you know your breastfeeding struggles are not your fault, and your triumphs really are the miracles you feel they are. Stephanie, welcome to the Milk Making Minutes. I'm so glad you're here.
Hi, it's so good to be here. Thanks for asking me.
We are real life friends, although we have not spoken in forever. Former colleagues, really, from my days in education. So as we get started, I would love for you to take a moment to introduce yourself and your family.
Sure. So I'm Stephanie Wrona, and I am a teacher. I teach elementary school. How we know each other. And, I love teaching reading, and that's my primary kind of work side. And then I also have a 3-year-old son who is just the most curious, amazing, funny, kind reader. He loves to be in books, and it's been a fun journey to kind of see that coming out. And I'm recently divorced, so navigating kind of what it's like to be parenting and co-parenting and what that means. And a new part of my identity among all the other new identities I have gained in the last 3 years, going from pregnant person to having birthed and breastfed and now having a toddler and all the things that come with it.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Now, recently divorced, have you navigated breastfeeding while co-parenting, or did you finish breastfeeding?
The relationship was strained at that point. And so I think, there were some positives with breastfeeding and nursing while that was not going as well as we had wanted. And I think there were also some stresses that breastfeeding put into that as well.
It's not uncommon for breastfeeding to add stressors into relationships and for people to, even in the best of relationships, for a partner to not understand all the stressors that get added to the person who's breastfeeding.
Yeah, I think for me, it was around mental load. As I've distanced myself a bit from that early infancy and that first 2 years, I breastfed for 2 years. It was the mental gymnastics of mothering and working and wifing and being and family and COVID and all of it. And it is so challenging to explain to people who've not done it why it is so labor intensive and exhausting. On top of, I had postpartum depression and trying to figure that out and figuring out my body again. And then I have hypothyroidism. So it was getting my medications realigned to a breastfeeding body. And so it's just so many layers.
So many layers. Yeah. 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 And breastfeeding adds to that mental load, especially if you're working, even if you're not working outside the home. But when you're working outside the home and you're always having to calculate how much milk does the baby need? How much time do I have to pump at work? Is the baby having enough at daycare? Are the providers using my milk in a proper way? Did I make enough for tomorrow? Do I have enough in the freezer? You're constantly doing that mother math in your brain.
Yep. Mother math. Oh gosh. If you haven't copyrighted that, get on it. Mother math. I love it. Yeah. You just can't. There's no preparing for that. No matter how many books. I love The Womanly Art of Breastfeeding. That's out by the Lily J. League. I mean, it's an amazing book. It was so grounding for me and so like affirming, and it's okay. And here's the things that could happen. And it's still
Yeah.
living it. You just can't.
It's different. Yeah, for sure. Okay. So we can get into that a little bit more, but I'm going to back up. You have a
He's 3
3-year-old.
and yeah, just about 3.
And before you yourself were actually pregnant, what was, or maybe at the time that you were pregnant, because I think that's kind of when we start thinking about this, what was your exposure to breastfeeding?
My mom nursed my sister and I.
Okay.
And so I knew I kind of didn't really have a like second guess on I would at least try. I'd had a few friends who had had babies at that point. And so I'd been around a little bit of nursing, having my own self go through it, see it. And I knew it could be difficult. I knew that sometimes it's hard or you need a lactation consultant or, whatever tools you can get. But I knew for me, I really wanted to try and do it. And then as I got later in the pregnancy, the OBGYN's office that I was with had a lactation consultant as part of their staff. And she ran their like preparation for birth class. And as I met her and learned a little bit more about labor and connecting with baby and like learning, all the benefits of breast milk, I was like, I'm doing this. Like, I'm just gonna make it happen. I felt pretty like resolute that I was gonna nurse.
Yeah. So it went from, yeah, I'm going to try to this is going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. What exactly happened in that class to make you feel that way?
I don't know if it was the class as much as her name's Robin, herself. I think her just knowledge in general, she's been, a lactation consultant and doula for, I don't know, 30 or 40 years. And
That's a lot of wisdom.
yeah, like it feels like that
Mhm.
ancient wisdom in a way of this is how you can, and there are ways to help you if it's not working out or you are struggling. And she was very much, I'm a phone call away. I'll see you in the hospital. You'll come visit again if you need me. And so that kind of made me know like I wasn't going to be alone,
So important.
Yeah. It boggles my mind how it's just not part of all birthing practices, whether it's midwifery or, at a more traditional setting, or even if you're in like the, geriatric patient and you need the like fetal medicine. Like I have a friend right now who's going to Hartford Hospital for fetal medicine. It should just be there. I just.
Right. And the fact that it was happening prenatally, and so you had already established this relationship with someone.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just a one-off class and then, okay, I'll never see that person again.
Right.
It was somebody that you had established a relationship with that you knew you could call. And so
Yes.
already in your mind, you thought, okay, it could be difficult. There are problems that can happen. And I know who I'm going to call if that happens to me.
Yep. Yeah. That saved me when I had the irrational thoughts and the postpartum really started to like set in, and you're like at war with yourself mentally, almost like with these intrusive, for me at least, it was the intrusive thought. I would not have done it without her.
Yeah.
I ended up needing
That
her
could
a
really
lot.
make or break. That can
Mhm.
really make or break the breastfeeding relationship,
Yeah.
breastfeeding outcomes. Okay, so you get to the point where you're like, this is happening. You mentioned the support prenatally from your OBGYN practice. You've mentioned the Womanly Art of Breastfeeding. Did you read that prenatally?
No, I found that when I read too much, I got more anxious about, did this happen? Did it not? And I am very much aware of, it's the same with kids in school, right? Everyone learns at their own pace. So every baby grows at their own pace. And so I had to really focus in on, he's eating, he's going to the bathroom, he's gaining weight. So he's fine. It doesn't matter any of the other stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great tip. If somebody has intrusive thoughts or suffers from whether it's generalized anxiety or postpartum anxiety, which there is a direct line between if you are a person who suffers from anxiety, generally, you are more likely to suffer from postpartum anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And So if you are someone who tends to kind of worry obsessively, you might tend to worry obsessively about your baby, and there can be too much information,
Yep.
too
Very
much
much so.
reading, too much Googling. And
Mhm.
that's when it is important to have someone like Robin, the lactation consultant, who you can
Mhm.
text and say, is this okay? Because if
Yep.
you have that one source of information that you know you can trust, then you don't have to go on the Facebook groups and get 10 different opinions that
Right.
may or may not be correct.
Right. And it's tricky because you think you join groups that are aligned to your either your values or like the way you're trying to mother, I guess.
Mhm.
And it's so funny. There are so many things, especially in those first, 2 years that can become so polarizing.
Mm.
Breastfeeding is definitely one. I feel like sleeping and how you choose to sleep and or co-sleep and baby wearing and then, feeding, just going to solids. It just was amazing to me how it became almost like political. And I
Mhm.
was like, I don't subscribe to this. I just want women to feel empowered to care for their children in
Yeah,
this very crazy, fast paced world that we live in.
right. Yeah, for sure. Okay. And so then, was there anything about the birth that may have impacted how your breastfeeding started out that you're aware of?
Not particularly. I had a very long labor. I was 28 hours in labor.
Mhm.
So I was just really exhausted at the end. And I remember being like skin to skin, and his name is Gus. He's Magnus, but we call him Gus.
Aw.
And Gus, like, I could just remember him almost like crawling across me to latch. And he really
No.
tried. He was so
Uh-huh.
persistent, but it didn't work the first, I think, 2 times.
Uh-huh.
So finally we did figure out a latch. And one of the things that was difficult is that my nipples are 2 different ways, and so the right latch was just so much better than my left,
Mm.
and having to practice that I could, like, cross nurse on my right, but I tried to kinda, like, football cradle
Mhm.
him on the
Mhm.
left side at first. I also have really large breasts, so, like,
Mhm.
just being able to maneuver my own body to,
Mhm.
like, see and feel, and it felt like juggling.
Mhm.
That just like, how do you get this exact right position?
Yeah. Especially
Um,
when the baby is learning too. It gets easier
yeah,
over time, but when you're both
for
learning
sure.
at the same time.
Yeah. So like in the hospital, I don't think anything happened per se in labor. It was more me orienting
Mhm.
and Gus learning, just
Mhm.
learning how to latch.
Yeah, yeah. So 28 hours of labor. Were you on pain medication and IV fluid?
I was. So I did a morphine sleep at one point because it had been a long time, and I had dilated, and then my water hadn't broken, and so once it broke, I went back down. I went from, like, 9 to 6.
Oh no.
Yeah, and they were like, "Well, maybe this'll help you relax," and it didn't, and I was still all like, "Oh," it just was not a positive experience, and then, I don't know, another, like, 3 hours later, I was just so exhausted, and the midwife came in, and I didn't want an epidural. I don't like needles. I wasn't really opposed to, like, the, medication itself, and I knew it can affect babies sometimes too, like
Mhm.
in utero, and she just looked at me and was like, "I think it's time. You need to let your body rest." And I was like, "Okay."
Mhm.
So we did the epidural, and then 45 minutes later, I could still feel pain in my hip. So they checked, and his head was right there, and he just
Oh.
popped right out.
Uh-huh.
So, so
Yeah.
yeah, so I did have 2 different
Uh-huh.
pain medications
Okay. But he
through
still
the
was able to do that breast crawl
Mhm.
and so when you said your nipples were different, they always been different, or once your breasts started to go through changes in later
Mhm.
term pregnancy, you started to nipple difference?
Yeah, it was definitely like nursing, like made it notice because Robin actually recommended trying to check your nipples. She called it a trick nipple, where you
Mhm.
didn't want it to maybe look like it wasn't inverted, but it could invert, or like it
Mhm.
wouldn't necessarily like elongate enough. And I was like, I had checked, and like she had like recommended a couple exercises to try to make sure that your nipple would like elongate. And I was like, okay, I think I'm good. And then when we were in the hospital, I remember she looked right at me and was like, didn't you practice? Like your left nipple, like we should have been having you on a nipple shield to practice to like help it come out more.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, I thought it was okay.
Oh, you just don't know, it's haven't
Right.
seen it before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was in jest. She wasn't,
Yeah.
really like chiding me, but it
No,
was just
yes. Yeah.
you know. So no, and like even now, my nipples are fairly flat. Like they don't
Uh-huh.
protrude very much. So it was kind of hard for me to tell anyway. I really was
Right.
kind of I don't really know how this is gonna go.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And so it was a little flat, but baby could pull it out once he had a good latch.
So I ended up using a nipple shield for couple like 2 weeks maybe in
Okay.
the beginning, and I think it helped Gus learn to open enough and
Uh-huh.
latch on, and then
Yeah.
I pretty quickly weaned it out
Okay.
so that there wasn't a, like, dependency on it. Plus,
Okay.
I mean, it's like a whole 'nother thing. It's just another layer, and I had to pre-pump for a while because my letdown was so strong. So I would, like, pump for 5 minutes, get the nipple shield, get a little milk in it, get him to latch. Hopefully, he stayed on. Sometimes it'd fall off and I could latch him to me.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes he wouldn't, and to do it again, that first month was like the only thing I did was nurse, pump,
Yeah.
sleep, and bathe myself, I feel like, because it
Yeah.
was like a constant
If you were
just
lucky, you bathed yourself.
yeah, right, that was a good day.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wash, rinse, repeat. Just,
Wash, rinse, repeat.
yeah. Yeah. And I think that's important for you, my dear listener, to hear is that it
Yes.
does get easier.
Oh.
The learning curve is steep with breastfeeding.
Mhm.
If you're getting the right supports, though, it evens out.
Mhm. That first, like, 4 to 6 weeks, like, if I had one, like, PSA, it would be plan nothing. Give yourself all your grace, the things you love to drink the most, and your favorite snacks, and just know my one job right now is to learn how to feed my baby and bond and learn what they like and how they want to be held and cuddled and burped or not or whatever that baby wants because they're all so different. And there's so many you're gonna get tips and tricks and well-meaning whoever's.
Mhm.
And at the end of the day, every kid is different, and you're the one that's
Mhm.
gonna know your kid.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you were given this nipple shield, were you also given an aftercare plan to be able to wean off the nipple shield? Did you have appointments set to go in so that it wasn't that, okay, I have this nipple shield and now for the rest of my nursing journey, need to use this?
Mhm. So Robin also ran a mom's group affiliated with our practice, and so because I was going to that, I think it was twice a week. I don't remember if it was once or twice a
Mhm.
week, but I was seeing her pretty regularly, and so some of us would kinda, like, check in with her. She'd recheck a baby for a tongue tie if someone was having an issue or, whatever. It would kinda ran the gamut. She usually picked one topic. We would chat and share some things. The kids would play a little. Robin would check what she needed to on babies or mommy's bodies. And I think if I had needed the nipple shield longer, I'm sure she would have scheduled an appointment for me, in
Mhm.
the, like, hospital setting or the office, but it naturally kinda phased I tried to phase it out
Mhm.
as soon as I could because I knew
Okay.
it would become a crutch.
Yeah.
That's how it felt to me.
Yeah. And so did she ever, when you were first given that nipple shield, was it explained to you that this is a stopgap? This
Yeah.
is a temporary solution?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it was definitely temporary, and that's when she also talked to me about pumping first. Because what happened was I nursed in the hospital, okay, went home. I think, like, my milk started to come in, nursed again at home a few times, and then it was time to sleep and try to wake up every, what is it, 3 hours, I guess.
Mhm.
And I couldn't get him to latch enough, and I knew
Mm.
Gus really hadn't eaten for probably, like, 8 or 10 hours, like, not really any substantial calorie. And so I remember calling her at, like, 5 o'clock in the morning because I should have called her in the middle of the night, but I felt like I didn't want to disturb her. So I was released from the hospital over Labor Day weekend. And so because of that, I couldn't get seen in 3 days. It would have been 4 days. And they were really anxious because of his weight dropped. So I had like a stop appointment on the Saturday to just to make sure his weight was okay.
Okay. At the pediatrician's office.
Yeah, but it wasn't at my office. It was at the on-call for the group. And she rubbed me the wrong way and looked at me in the chair when I had said, I'm breastfeeding. Here's what I'm doing. And she said, well, when are you going to start to introduce formula? And at that moment, I looked at my then husband and said, I was like, I don't need to hear anything else this person has to say. I will wait until I think Tuesday, when I see Dr. Bush and go talk to our practice, who I knew was pro breastfeeding. It's part of the reason I picked them. And so I think because I met her and had that experience, I then like got over anxious and nervous and didn't want to tell Robin because like I should be able to do it. And then I knew it was too much. So I had to get more help.
What was her response?
She was just kind of like that fish open type mouth. And I said, I'm all set. Thank you. Like we had weighed him. He was the same weight. He hadn't dropped any weight. I don't know why we're having a conversation. You're not my pediatrician. And you're trying to tell me I need to have formula for what? So I was like, eh. Like to this day, if that's I'd rather go to urgent care than try to go to her as my on-call. I won't do it.
Yeah.
It really, really offended me.
And knowing what you know now, having breastfed a baby for 2 years.
Yep.
And having gained all the knowledge as a breastfeeding mother, what should she have said to you in that appointment? What would have helped ease your anxiety in that moment?
I think I needed her to say, your baby's healthy. His weight is fine. Keep doing your best to nurse and latch. Are you having any trouble or do you have any questions?
Yeah.
I don't think anything in my situation or then the presentation of my baby warranted bringing up formula. I feel like it would be the same as if someone went in who was formula feeding from the start and to be told, well, you have to start breastfeeding right now when they had already known that was their right choice.
Right.
It just it didn't feel respectful.
Right.
So what would have felt respectful is asking me if I had questions, I think.
So after you had that horrible experience with the on-call doctor, did you get additional support in the next few days from someone?
Yeah. So I saw Robin at the hospital because that's where she was, because it was still over that long weekend.
Okay.
And that's when the nipple shield came into play. And she taught me how to use it and helped me just reset and relatch and kind of just coached me all over again. Oh, you know what else she taught me in there too is how to really position a footstool. So I found it to be almost impossible for me to get a comfortable nursing position and a latch for Gus unless I had my right leg up on the stool. It was just the way my body needed to adjust with the size of my breasts and to not get crunched over. And then you're in the beginning, I got him on and I'd be looking down and almost pulling up my breast a little bit and he'd get on. And then I'd realize I couldn't sit up enough.
Oh no. So
And
you
I
would
was
be
like
like
crunched in
the
and my neck.
hunchback.
Oh, it was horrible. And I was terrified that he'd pop off and I wouldn't get him to latch again. So I would just kind of wait there. And Robin was like, no, 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 no. We're going to do this again. And like that coaching session of get comfortable, get your stool where you want it, get another pillow, get another blanket, whatever you need, and then get him on. That was like the changing moment of, oh, I can do this again.
I love that because so many people nurse through not only, we talk a lot about nipple discomfort.
Yep.
But we don't talk as much about other bodily discomforts from just trying to get the baby latched. And so not setting up your own body to be
Yep.
comfortable before latching. And if you're tight and tense, it's easier for the baby to be tight and tense.
And then you're uncomfortable. It's painful. You don't want to do it again. Get
Yeah.
comfortable.
So you mentioned at the beginning that you have breasts that are on the larger side.
Oh, yes.
And in a lot of the images, breastfeeding images we see, there's been a shift in the 9 years that I have been in the breastfeeding space, but it
Okay.
still needs to change more. A lot of the images you see, especially illustrations and books, it's like these perfectly kind of round, small breasts,
Yeah.
not hangy breasts, not like really, not breasts that are like larger than the baby's head, you know? And
Yes.
so it's hard then when you're trying to compare your body, like if you're
Yep.
looking at a video or a illustration or even a photograph, but the breasts don't show an image similar to what you're working with. So did you come across images like that, or did you get help learning how to navigate breastfeeding with larger breasts, like positions that worked well, not only positions of the baby, but your own? You talked about how she helped you set up pillows and blankets and stuff, but was there any other additional help you got that helped you navigate breastfeeding with larger breasts?
No.
Mm-hmm.
Even in like the La Leche League stuff, there's not a ton out there to talk not only about larger breasts, but just being like a larger person, right? I'm a size 16 in pants, right? So I'm a more in the closer to the plus size end of shopping, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not common to see, well, I might want to modify in this way because, if you have a bigger belly, that also is kind of, you want to adjust, right? And the perk there is maybe you have a little bit of a bigger arm where there's more to hold the baby's head up under you. So it's just different. It's not like a good or bad. There's no like valuation there, but I really had to take the information that was just woman specific. Your nipple does this thing. The milk is going to come out. The more you nurse, the more the milk's going to come.
Mm-hmm.
And then really tweak it so that it was right for my body.
Did you come to find various positions or ways you held your breast, even though you didn't learn it from any particular sources? Did you, as a person, find things that were super helpful that somebody
Yeah, I
else
did.
with a larger body or breast might be like, okay, gonna try that?
Okay, so Robin and I talked a lot about bringing baby to breast, not breast to baby. And because my just the cuppet of my breast is so large, I would end up kind of lifting the upper portion so I could kind of see my nipple better. And then I really used the like two finger to kind of pinch and draw it forward to then use my other hand to kind of latch him
Mhm.
onto me.
So you're kind of illustrating putting two fingers kind of around almost the areola
Yep.
and then lifting the breast
Yep.
in that way. And you're kind of pinching out the nipple by pushing back the breast tissue just around the
Yes.
areola.
Yes. But bringing him to meet that instead of myself down to him.
Right. Yes.
And I also found that like nursing pillows were
Mm-hmm.
not the right shape for me and the right thickness. I ended up using two different pillows, like one on my side and one on my lap. And I even just like would maneuver them as I went to get comfortable. And then
Yeah.
I would settle. And as he got bigger, it got easier because
Right.
he was more comparable to my breasts. But when he was first little, it was the pictures. I mean, I sent you one of the pictures, and if you use it, great. But he was very small in comparison.
Yeah. It definitely does get easier the bigger the baby gets. But I can imagine that the proportionality of a tiny baby to bigger body, bigger breasts makes navigating trying to get a tiny mouth and a tiny baby with a tiny bobbly head to find the breast tissue more challenging. And I've seen that. I've seen that with clients.
Yeah.
And it's really important to talk about because people with all sorts of bodies are trying to feed
Mm-hmm.
babies,
Mm-hmm.
and they should get the support they need to do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's like another layer of like, we're not shaming anybody here,
Hmm.
right? You're valid. Your body is valid and your experiences are valid. And we get to just say, and how can we help make it work for you?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So it took a couple of, you said about 6 weeks to
Mm-hmm.
feel like, okay, I've got this.
Yeah.
And how long were you using the nipple shield? A couple of weeks?
Couple of weeks, not very long in the parameters of people that need to use them. I
Okay.
have heard. I
Okay.
don't know a ton, but yeah, it was a couple weeks.
Do you love to read about pregnancy, childbirth, and breastfeeding? Are you looking for books to help you become a more confident parent? Or perhaps books to help you understand what went wrong with your breastfeeding journey or to do better next time with breastfeeding? Or do your kids have questions about breastfeeding or pregnancy, but you don't really know how to answer them? Would you prefer to have a curated list on these topics? Go to the link in the show notes to my new affiliated bookshop. Every purchase you make benefits the Milk Making Minutes. But better than that, these books are vetted. I've read them all, and I feel very confident recommending them to you. I'll be adding to them continuously, so go to that link when you want to purchase a book. It will help the show, and you can feel confident it will be a purchase you will enjoy. Knowing that Stephanie did get support from her lactation consultant and was attending a twice weekly support group and did breastfeed for 2 years, I wanted to know how long it took her to feel really at ease while breastfeeding. As you hear her response, think about how long it took you. Could you have become more comfortable in a shorter time with more or different supports? What would a twice weekly in-person support group with other moms led by a professional have done for your breastfeeding proficiency? Why isn't this available to all people learning to feed human milk to their babies?
I would say, but it's somewhere in that month to 6 weeks marker was when I really felt like there was some routine.
And were you ever worried about milk supply?
Oh, yes. Gosh. So I had a lot of milk in the beginning. And because I have a large breast, I'd get engorged and it would be hard for Gus to latch because it'd be so hard. So that's what started me pumping first to kind of soften up my breast tissue enough so that he could latch and it was ready. And so when I was doing that so much in the beginning, I think I had oversupply because my body was making what it needed when I was doing that initial pumping and then what he was actually consuming. And so for the first, like 8 weeks, yeah, 8 or 10 weeks, it was like really great. And I had a freezer supply and I knew I was going to get ready to go back to work in like another 4 weeks. And I was like, it's going to be okay. I'm going to be able to pump and I'll have just enough. I'll have enough. I'm going to have more than enough. And then the closer I got to going back to work, I started making less milk. Like I started to regulate more. And once I was back to work, he was 4 months old when I went back to teaching. And I literally pumped like just enough every day for the next day's feeding.
Knowing that Stephanie is a teacher, I asked if she was able to get sufficient pumping breaks at work. She said she was able to align her prep time, lunch, and or recess so that she could pump twice a day. And then she would pick Gus up from daycare and nurse him immediately to avoid a third pumping session. One of the systemic barriers people often face is a cultural bias against breast milk from daycare providers viewing breast milk as a bodily fluid and not the amazing first food it truly is. This is what she had to say about her daycare provider's attitude about her breast milk.
I remember her saying something like, oh, my husband thinks it's gross because I had frozen milk in her freezer because one of the rules for her was like she had to have maybe three feedings, three bottles backup in case you're ever like late or there's an emergency or something. Like that's the state
Mm-hmm.
law. And I was like, okay, good to know. Like they're not pro breastfeeding at all.
Soon after this initial time at daycare, COVID hit, and Stephanie began teaching remotely from home, where she would nurse Gus intermittently in between times when she needed her camera on. Because heaven forbid a human mammal use their breasts in front of children to nurse her baby. She then told me about discussions she had with her own family about nursing openly while other people were in her home.
I remember having some conversations with my mom in specific, and she was like, well, are you going to breastfeed when people are around? Or are you going to go in another room? And I was like, you're coming to my house to visit me and my kid. So I'm going to do this wherever it works. And because I'd had so many up and downs and really found this place in my couch with the pillow and the stuff, I was like, this is where I nurse. And if you are uncomfortable, like, please use a different room, but I'm not moving. I worked too hard to figure this out.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So I know that you also experienced postpartum anxiety or postpartum depression.
I would go, it's probably more anxiety than depression. I land more on the anxiety side, I think.
Yeah. And did you know it was happening at the time, or just in hindsight, you can say that was happening?
I didn't realize it was a problem until right around when I went back to work. And I started to have a lot of nervous, intrusive, worried, couldn't sleep because of the amount of milk I was making. And Gus also was not digesting well and had his just a lot of mucus in his stool. He did not feel good. And so I eliminated my diet further because I just needed him to feel better, because he was waking up every hour for a long time. It's what put me more into co-sleeping, because I couldn't get up. I was like, I cannot get up again. And it just like all hit as a perfect storm. And I remember being on my couch like at 2 a.m. one night being like, this is not normal. Like, this is not right. And I called, I don't know what I called, but I called something for references for postpartum therapists. And I happened to get who I still see her now. Amazing and a huge lifeline. And I wouldn't have gotten through it all. The nursing, the working, all of it.
Yeah. And I'm so glad that you brought up that it began as, or maybe it didn't begin there, but the anxiety around milk supply. Because there is like normal anxiety around milk supply, and then there's like obsessive anxiety around milk supply. And there are times when I'm counseling someone and their baby is good, their baby is healthy, they're producing what is within the range of normal amounts of milk, but often they're playing a comparison game. They're seeing what people are pumping on the internet. Their friends are telling them they should have this huge freezer stash. And there's such a range of what people can produce. And just because your friend can produce, X amount of ounces in a day on top of breastfeeding your baby does not mean that you can make your body do that, no matter how much blue Gatorade you drink in a day. And I say that with a little side eye, because blue Gatorade isn't going to do it for you, honey. So, and I start to hear people, and the conversation just goes round and round. And then I cannot diagnose people with postpartum anxiety or postpartum depression. But what I can say to people is, I think it would really help you if you sought out support with somebody who could help you with anxiety.
And, let's add the factor that we haven't talked about at all yet, the hormones.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about wild roller coaster of emotion. I'm a fairly hormonally fluctuating person with my thyroid disorder. So like I know kind of my comings and goings, but the post-labor, it's months. It's not like that first week when people talk about, oh, you laugh one day and then you cry the next, but it happens over time. And it plays a huge factor and then can make that anxiety worse.
Absolutely.
Just because you're not able to regulate your insides anyway. Yeah, I also really benefited from there's like a questionnaire that the
Edinburgh
my
scale
OB did and the pediatrician did for me. And that's I did one at I don't know where I did that. I guess I had like a 2 week follow up maybe. And then Gus must have had a 1 month one or something. They were pretty close together. And I took it and the ratings went up. And I was like, okay.
Yeah, time to get some help. Yeah, that's so important to call out that those scales are meaningful. There's a reason that those questions are being asked, and anybody can look it up. It's the Edinburgh scale. And typical baby blues, that hormonal shift that causes what we call the baby blues, that can last for about 2 weeks. But if your symptoms are happening beyond 2 weeks, your typical postpartum baby blue hormones should have regulated by then. So if you're still feeling sad more often than you're happy, if you're still feeling highly anxious, if it feels like nobody can take care of the baby but you, if you're worried, if you're having intrusive thoughts about obsessing over whether or not the baby's going to be okay, if you can't sleep even when the baby's sleeping because you're worried something's going to happen to the baby while they're sleeping, if all these things are running through your mind, it could be time to call somebody. I asked Stephanie if talk therapy was all she needed to improve her postpartum mental health. She opened up about using both talk therapy and meds to help her feel better. After 4 months of talk therapy only, this is what she said about adding medicine as another tool to help her.
I still was just having such internal struggle. Like that's just the best way I can put it. Like at war inside yourself. And so I went on Zoloft and thank God, it has been life-changing.
Great.
It has really, really helped me. She has the best analogy. She describes it as you went to Starbucks to get your favorite coffee and you have to get it back out to the car without spilling. So you want the lid that has that little rise in it because it gives you a little room for those bumps in the road. And that's what Zoloft does for me. It's that lid on my cup of coffee so that there's a little room for those splashes.
Before we wrapped up, I asked Stephanie if her postpartum mental health impacted her relationship, which she had told me at the beginning had recently ended. She articulated something that so many of us feel when we become mothers to one degree or another. Whether it ends in divorce or ends in the relationship becoming stronger or somewhere in between, it's an important piece of the postpartum puzzle.
I think the piece that I know most clearly is that going through labor and breastfeeding and the sense of empowerment I felt from learning how to listen to my body is part of what gave me the strength to say, is this relationship what I want and what I need for my life and for my child's life? Like, is he going to grow up with a happy, open mom who can love freely and be the person he needs to be?
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for sharing that part of your story. It's related to the postpartum experience because I do think many people, whether it's the mental load that you discussed earlier, or, that empowerment that you're talking about of coming into yourself and feeling like, I know a little bit more clearly what I want for myself and for my children. And it's not going to be the same answer for everybody.
No.
So I thank you so much for sharing your stories. I know there's some that we did not get into. Like I know that you you mentioned it briefly, but we didn't get to talk a lot about it, the food allergies.
It's so fun to be able to talk about, what you go through in your early home motherhood stages. So I'm just grateful that I was asked and invited, and it's so cool to see you like shining in this work that you were meant for. So I'm so glad that you have this amazing opportunity for people to be a part of.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you shared your story. It's a good one, and it's going to be one that touches a lot of people. So thanks so much.
All right.
Stephanie's story is one that highlights what great prenatal education and support can do to empower breastfeeding. Not just a class that shows all the latest breastfeeding gadgets and the prescribed ways to breastfeed, but a relationship with someone who has your back and will be there for you at a moment's notice once you have had the baby. This type of support can truly make or break a breastfeeding journey. Stephanie shares a story of coming into her own power. She describes breastfeeding as a way into feeling empowered. I wonder if that's a way that you would describe it. And if not, why not? To join us for conversations about what gets in the way of more people coming into their power while breastfeeding, join the Milk Making Minutes community group on Facebook, where we examine all of the barriers that get in the way and make breastfeeding difficult. I'll see you there.